Greetings everyone, this is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and today I'll be doing a video about what is Torath Mosheh, in short, or at least as short as possible that I could do it. So the question sometimes I get is, in short, what is Torath Mosheh? A little bit complex. So first of all, the statement Torath Mosheh, it means Torah of, that's what Torath means, and then Moshe, which is in English people say Moses, but Moshe is actually how you pronounce it. So the same thing as the Torah when it mentions, and also in the rest of the Tanakh it mentions that there's Torath Hashem and Torath Amet. It's the same thing. Torath Moshe is Torath Hashem and Torath Amet because Moshe Rabbeinu received everything that he received and taught to the people of Israel, to Am Yisrael, he received it from Hashem directly. So in short, if I was to try to put this in a context, a short context, Torath Moshe is all ancient, authoritative, and authentic historical texts, concepts, judicial rulings, practice, and traditions that trace directly back to the singularity of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, as it was transmitted from Hashem to Moshe ben Amram, also known as Moshe Rabbeinu, and to all of Am Yisrael, and has been preserved by their descendants who are from the most ancient communities of Mizrahi, Temani, Sephardic, Maghrebi, and Ashkenazi Jewish communities. So if trying to understand where exactly does this statement come from and the concept come from, first of all, if we look in Sefer Yehoshua ben Nun, which is the book of Joshua in English, you see a statement which says, Av Yivneh Yehoshua Mizbech L'Adonai. So later on, when it goes on to explain exactly how he built it, it mentions that he did it according to the Sefer Torath Mosheh. So later in one of the prophets Malachi, you basically see where he mentions, Zichru Torath Moshe, Avdi Asher Tziviti, Oto B'chorev al kol Yisrael hukim mishpotim. So translated, what this means is the prophet ends with telling Am Yisrael that they must keep Torath Moshe that was commanded to him by Hashem, and basically that includes the hukim and the mishpatim, which is like the statutes and judgments. So the website, the Halakha Hamaim, has a really good section where they specifically detail what Torath Mosheh is, and you find a lot of this talk in Hebrew text, for example. You don't find a lot of it being mentioned in English. So it says, Habitui Torath Mosheh mofia b'tanach arba aser pa'amim. Sheva b'nevi'im, Yehoshua melachim malachi, and v'sheva b'ketuvim, Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, Divrei HaYamim. It further states, בתורה עצמה מופיעים ביטויים כמו התורה אשר עשה משה או תורת ציוונו לנו משה, אבל לא תורת משה. So translating this means that the bitui, or the statement Torath Moshe, appears in the Tanakh, in the writings of Yehoshua ben Nun, Joshua and Melachim, also known as Kings, and in the prophet Malachi, and it also appears in Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, and Divrei HaYamim, or the Chronicles. And it mentions specifically here, which the statement Torath Moshe itself doesn't show up in the 5 books of Moses, but it is insinuated by the statements in the Torah where it says Torah Asher Sam Moshe, and also Torah Tzivonu La Moshe. So essentially what it means is the bitui Torath Moshe, even though the statement itself doesn't show up in the Torah, it's implied by the places in the Torah where it says that Moshe transmitted to the people of Israel what he was given by the Creator, by Hashem. Further, in the book Duroshot al Perushot HaShavua, it mentions that for the following: התורה שבעל פה מפורשת ומסיימת את ההוראה ואת ההלכה של תורת משה, הנבואית, הנסיבות, המקום והזמן, ומשתנות מדור לדור ומקום למקום. המטרה היא שהעם המחויב מרצונו לתורה יכול להגשים את שליחותו בין העמים. So essentially what this is saying in translation is that the statement Torath Moshe is essentially detailing the explanations of the Torah, the Torah Shebaal Peh, that is passed down from one generation to the next, and it's something that deals with the current situation that each generation is found in. So essentially when one is saying Torath Moshe, this is what they're describing. They're describing the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu received from the Creator Hashem, including the written text and the oral Torah concerning how to do the text. And it was passed down from each generation. It deals with every situation each generation is found in. Further to this, when the Rambam in his commentary on the Mishnah details what the different, you could say, foundations of the Torah are. And I think in English they usually mention them as the 13 principles of faith, but essentially his description is a lot longer than what most people know to be the 13 principles of faith. Usually what people know in English is usually a condensed version, and even in Hebrew there's a condensed version, but it's not what the Rambam specifically wrote. But he calls them the foundations for the Torah, for example. So he mentions when it comes to the 8th and also the 9th one, he says the following: Hayasod hashmini hu Torah min hashemayim. והוא שנאמן שכל התורה הזו הנמצאת בידינו היום הזה היא התורה שנתנה למשה ושהיא כולה מפי הגבורה. So essentially what that means is in the 8th foundation he mentions that the Torah is from Shemayim, meaning that it comes directly from Hashem. And essentially that the Torah that we have in our hands today, in this generation and the previous generations, is the same Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu received from Hashem himself. And further he mentions in the 9th foundation, he says, وَيَسَوْدَ تِشْعِي הביטול, והוא שזו תורת משה, לא תבטל, ולא תבוא תורה מאת השם זולתה. So essentially what he's saying here is that there is no situation where the Torah in any form is going to be invalidated or done away with or replaced with another Torah from some other time. That when Hashem gave the Torah, he gave it with the specific reason that the Torah that was given at Mount Sinai would be kept throughout all generations. And nobody would show up and say, oh, by the way, let's get rid of this Torah and replace it with this Torah, or this commandment here, we'll replace it with that commandment, or we'll get rid of it altogether. Nobody will be able to say that when the Creator gave the Torah, he gave it completely as it needed to be, including the ability to deal with any kind of future judgments, issues, or changes in situations and technology. So further to this point, Rabbi Yichya Gafach, who's from Yemen, makes the following point in a book he wrote called the Miltamot Hashem, and he states on page 30, "Ve'ata het aznecho, v'shema hatoshuvot Torat Mosheh emet, lichvod Hashem Elohim emet." So this statement basically is saying that he's basically giving some answers because he was dealing with a debate that was happening in Yemen at the time, and he's giving the answer that from a perspective of Torath Mosheh, meaning the truth of Torath Mosheh, Torath Mosheh emet, and essentially which is like the Chavod Hashem Elohim emet. So Hashem is emet, the creator of altering things is true, and Torath Mosheh is true. So he mentions on page 37 of his book, Hine ma ma'od yishtamam. הקורא בנלבד הדבק בתורת משה רבנו עליו שלום שבכתב ושל בעל פה ובקיא בה דיינו במשנה ובתלמוד ובמדרשי רז"ל וענייניו יחזו דברי הגאונים החסיד בעל החובות הלבבות ורבי יהודה הלוי ורבי סעדיה גאון ורמב"ם בחיבורו ורבי אליעזר ברמיזה ובאורקח הספר המצוות הגדול וספר מצוות הקטן. So essentially what he's doing is listing out the things that he's considering to be Torath Mosheh, or the text that you can find it in, which he spells out as being the Mishnah, the different Talmuds, the Midrashim of our sages, basically the rites of the Geonim. He specifically mentions the Chasidu Adba'al Chavot Levavot, Chavot Levavot, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, and the Rambam's writings, and also Rabbi Eliezer Begamarza, and his basically situation with the mitzvot gadol and the sefer mitzvot hakatan. So essentially, this is his description of what Torath Mosheh is, collecting that there are sources for what is considered Torath Mosheh, and it's not just out in the air. And this is very clear, and I think it'll be clear when we look at some of the other information that describes what we're talking about. So following this, also Rabbi Moshe Al-Shich says the following: "V'chol asher asiti, hu haya oseh, modia b'davorav leMoshe, al ken b'yah shemo, asher ekra lo chavora li yachdav, sham mefurash v'shem meforesh, ואחד הכרותיו בשם האומר העושה תורת משה, ואומר אני טרם החיילי. So essentially he's mentioning some of the same things we mentioned earlier, that Torath Mosheh includes those things that are from the oral explanation of how we're to do the Torah, and essentially he's repeating some of the same things that we've mentioned earlier. So let's deal with the more detailed answer. So all of this begins with what we call the Avot, meaning that from the time, you could say really starting from Avraham Avinu, that until the time of when the Torah was given, you had who we call the Avot, and this would have been from Avraham to the Bnei Yisrael. So at that time, Hashem had been dealing directly with Avraham and also his descendants from Yitzhak to Yaakov. But at the time, there wasn't, for example, a national revelation that it had happened. So what changed everything, and the singularity happened. And you've heard me talk about this in lots of videos, where Hashem spoke 10 things to Am Yisrael at Mount Sinai, and that everyone heard and saw all of the words that Hashem said. And according to some sources, that not only did they hear the Creator speaking, that they also saw the words of Hashem that He was speaking, written as if it was like fire or lightning amongst like dark clouds. So you have a situation where when this singularity happened, everybody heard it and saw it in a way to where it wasn't just like Moshe Rabbeinu going up and saying, "Hey, Hashem gave me these commandments," and somebody says, "Well, how do I know that's what you got? How many are there? Well, I'm not sure I want to take that. Maybe that's not what you heard. Why can't we hear it? Why is that only you heard it?" But everybody heard it, and everybody knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who had received it, and they knew that they were receiving it too because they were there to see it for themselves. And that is the singularity of what we would call Torath Mosheh in this time. So continue from that point, there were also people who were along with Am Yisrael called Gerim, meaning that essentially there were people who were not descendants directly from Yisrael, meaning they were not descendants of Abraham, they were not descendants of Yitzhak, of Isaac, and they were not descendants of Yaakov. But the minute that both groups were at Mount Sinai and heard and saw the words of Hashem, today is Am Yisrael or Bnei Yisrael. So that would have included everyone who was biologically a descendant of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and everyone who was not, who joined themselves to Am Yisrael and took on the Torah in the same way. And of course, that would have meant that both groups would have married amongst themselves and produced the future generations of the people of Israel. So further to this point, in the Mishnah Torah, in the introduction, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also known as the Rambam, wrote the following. כל המצוות שנתנו לו משה בסיני בפירושין ניתנו, שנאמר ותנתנה לכו את הלוחות האבן והתורה והמצווה. תורה זו תורה שבכתב, ומצווה זה פירושו. וציוונו לעשות התורה על פי המצווה, ומצווה זו היא הנקראת תורה שבעל פה. So what the Rambam is saying here is that when the Creator of all things basically gave the mitzvot to Moshe Rabbeinu, he gave him not only like a mitzvah saying, to do this or don't do that, he also gave him an explanation of like what exactly he meant by it and what exactly is doing or not doing it, and what's the correct method of doing and not doing it. Further to that, he uses the explanation from the Torah where it says that Hashem said that he gave to Moshe Rabbeinu Torah and mitzvah. Now he could have easily just said, "I'm giving you the Torah." But he says Torah and mitzvah. So essentially the Rambam explains that the Torah that is mentioned in that statement is the written Torah. The mitzvah is the explanation of how to perform the Torah. And he mentions that in the next line where he says that the mitzvah is the explanation of how to do the Torah. Meaning that anyone can say, for example, like the Torah says, lasot totafot. But what does the word totafot even mean? The Torah doesn't explain what the word means. It doesn't explain where it says ukshartem, is the word used to put on a totafot, but it doesn't tell you exactly what are the ramifications of it. We know that the kasher is to tie something, but how exactly do you tie it? So any mitzvah in the Torah need an explanation because the written text itself is in many cases ambiguous because there's only so much you can put in a written text to explain something. Usually there has to be some oral explanation to point out, okay, well, when this statement says this, this word means this statement is like this sentence is written this way, and these spaces exist for these reasons. So essentially, this leads us into the post, giving of the Torah. That essentially, when you look in the modern time, there's a number of texts that are currently in the hands of Jews pretty much around the world, and there are also things that have been found through archaeology. And one of the things you find is that all of these things, all of these texts, all of these archaeology that have been found points to a common ancestor text that all of them come from. I mean, you would expect that after thousands of years, when Jews being separated all over the world, that the Torah in one place would be completely different than the Torah in another place. That there should be huge differences between each community in their written text and in their practice. But we find that all of them point to one source. So essentially what that means is that even if you're looking at a Dead Sea Scroll from the area of Qumran, even if you're looking at a Torah scroll from Italy, Iraq, Yemen, China, Spain, and even if you're looking at the Samaritan Torah, you can still see the common ancestry of each text, meaning that the common ancestry of the written text of Torath Mosheh. So essentially, if we were to break down what exactly is entailed in Torath Mosheh, we're essentially looking at several things, that there is a daily and personal, seasonal and judicial, and in the Bet HaMikdash, or the temple and the Kohanim. So meaning that when we get to the time when the Torah was given, they had the Mishkan, but eventually the Mishkan was given way to the temple in Yerushalayim, which was a bigger structure. Well, the Torah itself, for example, never explained what to do if you move to Yerushalayim. It doesn't say to make a Mishkan bigger than that, but we know about based on Torath Mosheh that essentially Hashem had given approval for there to be a bigger building in the place of Yerushalayim. The Torah, for example, mentions the Kohanim are supposed to do a bracha for all the people of Israel, but doesn't explain how, when, where, or what to it. So that is included in Torath Mosheh. Also, the situation of having a judicial body known as the Bet Din Agadol or the Sanhedrin is actually something that is mentioned in the Torah to actually establish so that you have, like, for example, a Supreme Court of Torah rulings. And essentially the rulings that they say are the rulings that we go by. So the type of information that these individuals would be having to judge on as well as being knowledgeable of would include things like science, chemistry, all the different types of sciences that are necessary to have a society and to exist within society. They would have to know things of mathematics. They would have to know what are the different belief systems around the world. I mean, even though if the Torah tells us that, we don't hold by those things, we still have to know that they exist and know what the ramifications are about them. That would also include languages. They would have to be conversant in a number of languages and know what exists in the world. They would have to know geography to know exactly where in the world they are and how things work. And they would also have to know psychology. So all of these things were things that were discussed and debated and a part of the system of Torath Mosheh that existed from the time when the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu and to Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, as well as that exists today. Further to that, we know that even amongst the daily and personal lives, there's Torath Mosheh. So when you have someone who puts on tefillin, the word in the Hebrew text is totafot. The word totafot we know means the same thing as tefillin, because tefillin is simply an Aramaic translation of the word totafot. We know that, like, for example, when someone goes to a mikveh, the construction of a mikveh is common amongst Jewish communities, even if, for example, the style of them is different. Tzitziot, we know that when you see a Jew wearing tzitziot, it's pretty recognizable of what they're doing. We know that financial matters, also keeping kosher, kashrut, is something that's common amongst all Jewish communities. When it comes to the seasonal, the chagim, we know that all of these things are common amongst Jews who come from, ancient Torath Mosheh communities. So then this leads us into the generation-to-generation transmission. Essentially, from the time that the Torah was given until the modern era, there's been an unbroken chain that has existed. Because first of all, Hashem gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he was basically the top of all the Nevi'im. Even in the future, in the current time, the past, at all time, Moshe Rabbeinu was the closest to Hashem, and for example, he will be the only Navi, or the only prophet like himself. Essentially, what happened from there was that from after that point, Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu and also to all of the people of Israel at the Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, the Torah. So all the people heard the 10 statements that Hashem made, and they were with Moshe Rabbeinu when Hashem said it. And that led to, eventually, after the 40 years in the Midbar, the text of the written Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote before he passed away. So if after that point, you have a continuation that happened from Moshe Rabbeinu to his student, Yehoshua ben Nun, which he established in front of everyone to know that this will be the leader to carry on. He also taught Eliezer and Pinchas, who were the sons of Aaron, and also the grandson of Aaron. And he also taught the Zekanim and the Nasiim, who were the leaders amongst Am Yisrael, because they had also heard the Torah being given, but he had explained to them how to perform the Torah in practicality. And all the people received the practical part of it. So Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, taught people the mitzvah that he got, and then from there he would teach the actual application of it, and that is a part of the written and oral Torah that we have in today. So essentially that continued with Yehoshua ben Nun, who taught it to all the different Zekanim, which are the leaders of that time, and his Bet Din, meaning his Sanhedrin of his time, and that also continued with Pinchas and Eli. Now, the next step continued when you have from the time of the judges to the first Israeli kingdom, and that was led by Eli, who also taught it to Shmuel, and also the Zekanim of his time, the sages of his time, the Chachamim of his time. That continued from that time, from Shmuel, and also to David, which leads into the first Israeli kingdom. Now, going further and further through time, what we have is that process continued until the time of Rav Ashi, and that's when you get the compilations of the Talmuds. The Talmuds being the compilation of the information that existed about the oral Torah, meaning that the Mishnah itself was the oral Torah that they were passing down from the time that they had. And then from there, the Talmud is the discussions about the oral Torah as well as other topics that existed during that time. And that information has been transmitted through the generations until the modern era that exists amongst Jewish communities even today. So Besides this, you also have a number of Jewish families who have an ancestry of like written documents that trace them back to the Avot, meaning that, for example, what you see here is the family tree of the Selach family from Yemen. And eventually, essentially what it starts with is Yaakov Avinu, and it goes up until about the 1500s. So if you pass through the document, in the very bottom of it, you'll see where, if you looking at the Hebrew, you see it starts with Yaakov Avinu, and essentially goes from generation to generation through all the names that this family descends from, coming from Yaakov into the modern era. And there are a number of families who actually have family trees like this in this modern time, whether it be in Yemen, whether it be in Europe, whether it be in Spain, whether it be in North Africa, and in all parts of Asia and the Middle East. So in previous videos, you've seen this little kind of roadmap, if you will, that I provided that gets us from the time of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, at Har Sinai, to the first Israeli kingdoms and to the exiles. And through this time frame, from that time to the modern era, there has been an unbroken chain of transmission from the time of the giving of the Torah until the modern era, which leads us to how we get to different ancient Jewish communities, whether they be Yemenite Jews, known as Arabian Jews in English, for example, Sephardic Jews of North Africa and Southern Europe, Mizrahi Jews in the Middle East, like Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and other locations in those areas, and also Ashkenazi Jews, Jews who were keeping Torath Mosheh, who went into different parts of Europe, which leads us to Hasidic Orthodox and Haredi Jews today. So this is why one of the reasons that you won't hear me ever using the term or describe myself as an Orthodox Jew or even an observant Jew, because as far as I'm concerned, when a person says they keep Torath Mosheh, as you've seen in the previous descriptions of what it is, essentially what you're saying is you're keeping the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave at Mount Sinai, as well as the oral and written Torah, and the aspects of it that were kept amongst the sages of Israel, that has been transmitted through all various Jewish communities that were ancient until the modern era. And this also makes, for me, a better distinction where someone won't confuse me with modern movements that started off in the more modern era, either to try to break away from Torath Mosheh or to try to distinguish themselves in their location as being Torath Mosheh. And that's what I find true when someone asked me recently, why did I use the word Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox Jew? Well, the issue is because I follow Torath Mosheh. There's no need for me to use a modern term that had its source in Europe, which is a term that's not used amongst other Jews from the Middle East, Africa, or even in Israel. The term Orthodox is really not used even in Israel. So that's one of the reasons that I make that distinction. So again, going back to the point of when you look for Torath Mosheh, where do you find its most ancient remnants? And if we're dealing with like the oldest, Torath Mosheh communities outside of the land of Israel after the exiles and things like that, you find them in these locations that I have marked. And then from these locations, you have a situation where people and Jews like spread further north or further south or further east or further west. And that's where you get the source of other Jewish communities. And sometimes this is an issue that comes up when you have people who try to claim that one Jewish community in one location are not real Jews. The problem is that the written Hebrew text of the Torah is very clear who a Jew is, and essentially it's basically someone who keeps Torath Mosheh more than anything else. But essentially what happened is that if Jews could go east, west, and south, they obviously could also go north. There was obviously nothing stopping Jews from going from Turkey or from Greece or from Italy further into the north, which Jews did do. No different than there were Jews who went all the way to West Africa, East Africa, and to North Africa, just like Spain. So, essentially, this is where you can find Torath Mosheh. And if a person was trying to trace back what they're holding by to determine if it's Torath Mosheh, this is the path you would have to take. So looking into who are the leaders of Torath Mosheh communities, and this is going from from every area that you saw earlier of Jews from Yemen, from the Middle East, from Africa, from Europe. Essentially, when you're looking at someone who's Torath Mosheh, these are the kind of individuals you would see. These are the kind of people you would see as the rabbinical leadership in those communities, as well as in some cases you have people who are not rabbis themselves but are knowledgeable like a rabbi. Because essentially the commandments of the Torath Mosheh is that every Jew should be knowledgeable of what the Torah is, and every Jew should be doing the will of Hashem, which is the Torah. So a person who follows Torath Mosheh is doing everything they can to follow in the footsteps of the Avot and doing the will of Hashem, and for the sake of the fact that it's the truth. So this leads us into, for example, in a written form, what kind of things identify things as Torath Mosheh? Well, first of all, you can look and say, okay, well, what are the most ancient texts that exist? You have texts that have been found, in the modern era that are like over 800 years old, which are complete Torah scrolls found in Italy in that situation. In my community, for example, this is a Sefer Torah from my Bet Knesset, my synagogue here in Jerusalem, and this one's over 200 years old. And it was written by a sofer or scribe from the Sharabi family, who brought it. Also, the rabbi from our Bet Knesset, who passed away a number of years ago, brought it from Yemen. Further, you have different people in different communities who have Chumashim, meaning the 5 books of Moses in a book form that are over several hundred years old. This one, for example, is from Yemen, and it's over 500 years old. And for me, for example, whenever I try to use information for these videos, I always try to use the oldest text I can find, and I always try to get my hands on those. And for example, this is a digital version of a Chumash that I have that I was able to get my hands on that was from Yemen. It was produced about 1485 CE in Yemen by the person who transcribed it by hand was a man by the name of Dawid ben Benoyo ben Zadya ben Zahorio. So essentially you've got his name, his father's name, his grandfather's name, and his great-grandfather's name. And that basically helps trace my information back to those errors, for example, because he essentially copied the text that he had, the Torah that he had, the Chumash that he put together, from a Chumash that was several hundred years old before that. And that one was copied from one several hundred years older than that, and so on and so on. So in summary, Torath Mosheh is all ancient, authoritative, and authentic historical texts, concepts, judicial rulings, practice, and traditions that trace directly back to the singularity of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, as it was transmitted from Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe ben Amram, and to all the people of Israel, to all of Am Yisrael, and has been preserved by their descendants who are from the most ancient communities of Mizrahi, Temani, Sephardi, Maghrebi, and Ashkenazi Jews. So thank you for listening to the video. That's Torath Mosheh, and I think I made it within 26 minutes, which is one of the shortest videos I've done in most recent times. Thank you and bye.